I once shot up at 3 a.m. to the sound of my father's pain. After wiping him down, changing bandages, and giving his meds, my mother said, "You're making too much noise. He can't sleep." 14 months. I lived like a ghost in my own house. No one asked if I was okay. No one remembered my birthday. Then my brother, the one living in Greece who video called once a week, was nominated as head of HR, praised for his family devotion. So I did one thing: I sent his company a 3 a.m. voice recording and my 430-day caregiving log. If you think this is just another family drama, you're wrong. Hit subscribe now. Don't miss the most haunting and powerful episodes we've ever told. It was nearly midnight when the rain began to bleed across the window panes of the 14th floor office where Alyssa sat hunched over her monitor. The city buzzed beneath her headlights, cutting through foghorns echoing between concrete canyons, but inside, the building was dead quiet. Her heels were kicked off beneath her desk. A half-eaten protein bar sat beside her laptop. She had just finalized the media rollout for a new product launch scheduled in Singapore next quarter. The contract for her relocation was ready for signature. All that was left was the celebration. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated. A strange instinct crawled up her spine. She answered anyway. Alyssa. It was her mother's voice, sharp, breathless, threaded with panic. What's wrong? It's your father. He fell in the garage. They're taking him to County General. They said he might not walk again. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pressed against her chest, choking. "I'm on my way," she said, already shoving her laptop into her bag. That moment in the cold office under buzzing fluorescent lights was the first time in a long time that she didn't double-check her calendar before making a decision. She didn't wait to call HR, didn't email the team. She just moved like something primal had kicked in. By the time she reached her car, the rain was slashing sideways across the parking lot. Wind whipped at her trench coat, soaking her shoulders as she threw her things into the back seat and sped toward the hospital. Sirens howled somewhere in the distance, but she didn't know if they were heading toward or away from her father. At the emergency room, her mother stood alone under harsh fluorescent lights, gripping a foam cup of coffee like it was the only thing tethering her to earth. "They said it was his spine," she whispered. "He was trying to lift that old toolbox. Slipped, fell backward. Hit the stairs." Alyssa pressed her lips together, nodded. There would be time for questions. For now, she just needed to breathe through this moment. She waited in a corner chair for 3 hours while the surgeons operated. Her phone vibrated once with a text from her manager, "Everything good. We're all waiting for your confirmation." She didn't respond. At 3:12 a.m., the surgeon came out pale and tired. "He made it through the surgery he began, but there's significant damage to the lower spine. It's unlikely he'll walk again." Alyssa didn't cry. Not then. Her mother crumpled into a chair beside her. She simply stared at the sterile white wall behind the surgeon's shoulder and thought about how time doesn't wait for anyone to process the before and after. It simply becomes. She stayed in a motel that night, the hospital's family suite full. The pillows smelled like bleach. Her suit was still damp. At 7 a.m., she drafted a resignation letter but didn't send it. At 8, she called HR and requested a leave of absence instead. The Singapore contract would have to wait. 2 days later, she drove the 200 miles back to the small town she once swore she'd never live in again. The highway cut through the rain like a scalpel. Every mile closer to home felt heavier than the last. She pulled into her childhood driveway on a gray Sunday afternoon. The paint on the garage door was peeling, the hedge was overgrown. Nothing had changed except now the front porch held a new wheelchair ramp and a stack of medical supply boxes. Inside, the smell hit her Vicks antiseptic, something burnt in the oven. Her mother greeted her like she'd been gone for 10 years and like she'd never left at all. "I cleared out your old room. Thought you'd be more comfortable in the den. Closer to the bathroom." Alyssa didn't argue. She nodded and carried her suitcase inside. Her father was asleep in the hospital bed that now occupied the center of the living room. Machines beeped beside him. A bag of saline dripped into a line in his arm. His face looked smaller than she remembered, older, grayer, softer in the corners. "He doesn't like to admit it, but he's scared," her mother whispered. "He needs you here." Alyssa placed her bag down slowly. "Okay." That night, she lay awake in the den on a borrowed mattress, staring at the ceiling fan. It was the same one from her teenage years. Still had the sticker residue from when she'd tried to decorate it with glow-in-the-dark stars. The fan spun, and her thoughts did too. She thought about the apartment she'd leased in the city, the one with the high ceilings and a view of the skyline, the one she hadn't had the chance to move into. She thought about her friends, her work, her carefully planned future. Then she thought about her father's blank stare, the way her mother's hands trembled when opening pill bottles. And she made a decision. She pulled out her phone, opened the recorder app, and hit record. "My name is Alyssa Marie Thornton. I'm 28 years old. I'm recording this on November 3rd, 2023 from my parents' house in Greystone, Illinois. Today, I officially began caring full-time for my father, James Thornton, who is paralyzed from the waist down. She paused. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. This recording is for documentation purposes, in case I forget who I am in all this. She saved it as entry 01 and turned off the light. The days that followed were a blur of routines and sharp learning curves. Wound care, medication schedules, hygiene procedures, insurance calls, meals planned around pills, hours logged in quiet desperation. Her mother praised her publicly on Facebook and church to neighbors. Our Alyssa dropped everything to be here. What a blessing she is. But behind closed doors, it wasn't always so glowing. You didn't warm the water enough. You changed the sheets too late. You always look tired. Are you sure you're not making things harder? Alyssa said nothing. She recorded everything. Late at night, after hours of lifting her father into bed, repositioning his legs to avoid bed sores, cleaning up after another accident, she would lie in bed and whisper into her phone. Entry 0019. Mother said I forgot to remind Dad about his 2 p.m. meds. I reminded him twice. She was in the room. She still blamed me. She didn't know why she kept the recordings at first. Maybe just to survive. Maybe to prove to herself she wasn't losing her mind. But each time she pressed save, it felt like an act of resistance, like claiming back a part of herself that the house was slowly devouring. And slowly something in her began to shift. Not bitterness. Clarity. Alyssa didn't know it then, but the moment she pressed record that first night wasn't just about memory, it was the first step toward reclaiming her truth, toward a confrontation that would change everything. But for now, she got up, tied her hair back, and walked down the hallway toward her father's room. Because it was morning again, and there was work to do. Under the brittle overhead lights of County General's long-term care wing, Alyssa stood with her back against the wall, arms crossed tight against her chest, watching the nurse wrap another layer of gauze around her father's pressure wound. The skin had blistered near his lower spine, a side effect of lying too long in the same position. It was one of the many things she hadn't known to fear until now. The hospital smelled of ammonia, latex, and something vaguely metallic. Her mother, Margaret, sat in the corner clutching her purse like it might float them out of this nightmare. They say the wound needs to be cleaned and rewrapped every 12 hours, the nurse said. And he'll need insulin shots before meals. His glucose is spiking from the steroids. Alyssa nodded. Okay, teach me. The nurse blinked, then smiled slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. It's not complicated, but you'll need to keep a log. Time, dosage, site. Mistakes here aren't forgiving. Margaret turned to her daughter, eyes red and worn thin. Are you sure you can do all this, Ailey? I mean, maybe we could hire someone. We'd have to take out a loan, Alyssa answered, already flipping to a blank page in her notebook. So no, we can't. But yes, I can do it. That evening, after a 3-hour crash course in wound dressing, insulin injection, and catheter care, Alyssa drove her mother home while her father stayed under observation for one more night. The house had that smell again, that stale silence of a place lived in but not loved. Her childhood bedroom had become a storage room. They had already cleared the guest bedroom for her, but it still reeked faintly of mothballs and forgotten Christmas boxes. Margaret hovered behind her as she unpacked a few essentials. You shouldn't have to do this, you know. This wasn't what you were meant for. Alyssa paused, and yet, here I am. Her mother didn't answer. She just walked away, leaving behind the faint scent of gardenia perfume and something sharper guilt, maybe. The next morning, they brought James Thornton home. The hospital bed had been delivered along with a stack of paperwork Alyssa read twice before signing. The insurance coverage didn't extend to everything, and the medical supply costs alone had already eaten through most of her parents' savings. He'll need to be rotated every 2 hours to avoid more ulcers, a discharge nurse had explained briskly. Meals, medication, toileting. If he refuses, the commode bedpans will have to do. Do you have gloves at home? I'll get some, Alyssa said. And she did. She got everything: gloves, disinfectant, pill organizers, log sticky notes. The dining table, once reserved for Sunday roasts and birthday cakes, was now a makeshift medication station. For the first few days, her father didn't say much. He stared at the TV like it might blink first. His silence felt heavier than the oxygen machine humming beside him. Her mother spoke too much to fill the void. He's always been so strong, Margaret would say mostly to herself. This isn't him. But it was him now, and Alyssa adapted. She printed charts, set alarms, and made checklists. She developed a rotation schedule: pill time, repositioning, blood sugar checks, meal prep, cleaning. In the quiet moments, rare and fleeting, she read articles on caregiver burnout. Every symptom described her to a T: insomnia, emotional numbness, isolation, resentment, but she pressed on. Because that's what good daughters did. On the 4th evening, just as Alyssa was pureeing carrots for her father's dinner, he couldn't chew well anymore. The family's WhatsApp group chimed. A video call request from Brian. She wiped her hands and accepted the call on the kitchen tablet. Brian's face filled the screen, glowing under Mediterranean sunlight. Behind him, the sea glimmered, and a sleek white yacht rocked lazily in the marina. Hey, family, he grinned. Say hi to Isabel. A tanned brunette in sunglasses waved into the camera. Alyssa wiped a splatter of carrot off her shirt. Oh, Brian, Margaret gasped, appearing behind Alyssa in the frame. Where are you? Is that Greece? Hydra, Brian said proudly. Quick trip. Isabel's friends had a spot open on the boat. How wonderful, Margaret said, beaming like she'd just been knighted. You look so happy, sweetheart. Dad's okay? Brian asked, almost as an afterthought. He's adapting, Alyssa said. Good. I knew if anyone could handle it, it'd be you. His smile widened tone, glib, careless. Anyway, we're about to go wine tasting. I just wanted to check in. Love you guys. He signed off before Alyssa could respond. For a moment, the silence was sharp enough to cut. Then Margaret sighed, her voice dreamy. He looks so healthy, so alive. He always knew how to grab life by the horns. Alyssa blinked. He's on vacation. Yes, well, her mother murmured, he deserves it. Alyssa turned back to the carrots without a word. That night, long after the house had fallen into restless quiet, Alyssa lay in bed with her phone on her chest. She stared at the ceiling. Her arm ached from lifting her father out of the chair earlier. The inside of her elbow was bruised from accidentally banging into the hospital bed frame. She could still smell antiseptic on her hands even after 2 showers. She unlocked her phone, opened the voice recorder. Click. This is entry 04, she whispered. Dad didn't eat much today. His blood sugar dropped before dinner recovered after 15 minutes. Brian called. He's in Greece. I think Mom is more proud of his wine tasting than my insulin shots. Silence. I feel invisible. She clicked save. Every night she added more. Entry 06, Mom criticized how I changed Dad's bandages. Nurse checked later and said it was fine. Entry 07, Dad refused the commode again. Accident at 3 a.m., cleaned alone, no help. Entry 9, Mom said I look tired. Asked if I'm depressed. I said I'm exhausted. She said, well, we're all tired, Alyssa. The entries weren't just about what happened. They were how she survived. Days blurred together. The world narrowed to dosages, mealtimes, glucose meters, sponge baths. Her own needs shrank. She forgot to eat sometimes, stopped calling her friends, turned down job inquiries from old colleagues, deleted calendar notifications about her now-dead move to Singapore. The only constants were the recorder and the routine. One evening, as she helped her father into bed, he grunted, You don't have to hover like a hawk, you know. I'm making sure you don't fall. I said I'm fine. You can't move from the waist down, she reminded gently. He turned his face to the wall. Don't talk to me like I'm broken. The words hit her like a slap. She clenched her teeth. Okay. Later in bed, she recorded another entry. Entry 012, Dad angry again. I understand, but I'm not sure how long I can keep carrying both his body and his pride. She saved it and stared into the dark for a long time. She thought about how Brian had a yada tan and someone to hold his hand while Alyssa learned how to clean urine from bedsheets without gagging. She thought about the way her mother smiled when Brian called and how that smile never showed up when Alyssa refilled prescriptions or scheduled follow-ups. And slowly she stopped asking to be seen. She started preparing for the day she'd be heard. Under the pale morning light that filtered through lace curtains, Alyssa stood in the kitchen holding a mug she hadn't sipped from in over an hour. Her coffee had long gone cold, but she held it anyway, if only to feel like something in her life could be gripped with both hands and kept warm. The house was already awake. Her father had woken at 5:20 a.m., disoriented, sweaty, demanding to know why the damn bed wouldn't adjust properly. Her mother had begun the day with a whisper shout from down the hall. Alyssa, he's calling again. By 6:00 a.m., she had already helped lift her father from the bed, changed the soiled sheets, administered his blood pressure meds, started a load of laundry, and brought him half a banana and oatmeal he'd barely touched. Now it was 7:12 a.m., and the day hadn't even begun. She opened the cabinet to retrieve a new roll of adult diapers. Her hands moved out of habit, now fluid mechanical, like a nurse who'd stopped hoping for appreciation and just aimed to survive. Her phone buzzed with a message. Brian, hey, sunshine. Hope things are good there. Don't forget love is most real when it costs us something. She stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, then she locked the phone without replying. Real love, right? Was it real love to give 18 hours a day and receive silence in return? Was it love when no one asked how she was, how her back ached, how her nights were broken into 2-hour shifts of repositioning their father to avoid bed sores, how she cried sometimes in the shower just to remember she was still human? She grabbed the clipboard from the kitchen counter and checked the schedule she'd created. The next med round was at 900. She had 45 minutes to sterilize the commode, clean the wound kit tray, prepare lunch, and maybe if she was lucky, go to the bathroom herself. There was no room for anything else, not a walk, not a nap, not a thought. And yet the thoughts found her anyway. Alyssa had stopped setting alarms because her body had trained itself to respond to patterns. Every beep, every cough, every shuffle in the hallway jolted her into motion. She moved before her name was called. She responded before the words were said. Her life had become a preemptive dance to everyone else's needs. And no one noticed. Well, not entirely true. The neighbors noticed, they just didn't understand. It was Mrs. Elkins from 2 doors down who stopped her one day as she was bringing in the groceries, balancing 3 bags of prescription bottle and a file folder full of insurance forms. "You're such a good daughter," she said, nodding with what looked like admiration. "Staying home to take care of your daddy like that. Not many girls these days would give up everything like you." Alyssa offered a thin smile. Then came the follow-up. "Of course, I suppose it's easier when you don't have a husband or kids of your own, huh?" The words hit her like a slap dressed up in politeness. "Guess the Lord saved you for this," the woman added, not unkindly. Saved. That word rang in her ears later that night while she was scrubbing the grout in the downstairs bathroom. Saved, as if her life was a backup plan for someone else's needs. She didn't correct anyone. Didn't explain that she had once been engaged. Didn't say she'd postponed the wedding. Didn't say he'd left after 4 months of watching her disappear. Because who would care? She was already the woman people looked at with a mix of pity and praise. The perfect cautionary tale for career girls who waited too long. One afternoon, during a rare moment of sunshine, she pushed her father's wheelchair onto the porch. He sat silently watching birds peck at the grass. After 20 minutes, he asked her to bring him a soda. She got it. When she returned, he pointed at a couple walking their dog on the sidewalk. "Probably her son," he said. Alyssa said nothing. "Bet she doesn't do everything for him," he added with a huff. That night in her room, she opened her recorder. Entry 021. "Dad said nothing when I cleaned his bedding after an accident. But he made sure to suggest a stranger's child was better than me because I brought his soda late." Save. Click. Repeat. The only time she heard her own name spoken kindly was when her mother introduced her to people. "This is Alyssa, our rock," she would say, beaming. "She's given up everything to be here." But once the doors closed, the gratitude thinned. "You should smile more," her mother would say. "He senses your mood. If you're going to do this, you should at least do it without acting like a martyr. If only you'd settled down, you'd have a man to help." Alyssa often wondered what exactly they thought she was made of: concrete air. Something that didn't require rest, affection, or acknowledgement. Brian, meanwhile, sent a flurry of messages. "Brian, I know it's hard, but this is a test of spirit. God doesn't give us more than we can handle. You're stronger than all of us combined, sis. I couldn't do what you're doing." She wanted to text back, "No, you couldn't, and you never had to." Instead, she screen captured the messages and saved them to her evidence folder. The hypocrisy was too bitter to swallow. During a Sunday video call, Brian appeared shirtless on a balcony somewhere bright and expensive. "Just got done with a morning swim," he said cheerfully. "Is Dad doing any rehab yet?" Alyssa tilted the screen so her father's half-asleep face didn't show. "No, not yet." Brian replied, sipping something. "He needs to push himself. Mind over matter, right?" Margaret laughed. "If only we had your energy, son." Brian smirked. "Well, some of us were blessed with resilience." Alyssa ended the call early. That night, she didn't record an entry. She wrote instead. In an old journal she'd found wedged in a drawer filled with notes from college days and scribbles of ideas she'd never had time to chase. She wrote about exhaustion, not just the physical, but the kind that eats at you from the inside, hollowing out your voice until you don't recognize the sound of your own breath. She wrote about being praised in public and erased in private. She wrote, "I am tired of being a mirror for someone else's pride." She paused, staring at the page, then underlined the word mirror. The next morning, she woke at 5:16 a.m., not to a sound but to silence that felt off. She rushed to her father's room. He was sweating barely coherent. Blood sugar 46. She injected the emergency glucose. Waited. His breathing steadied. Margaret arrived minutes later, hair still in rollers. "What happened?" "He dipped," Alyssa said. Well, her mother sighed. "We can't afford another scare like this. You really have to be more on top of things." Alyssa blinked. It was 5:30 in the morning. She hadn't slept more than 4 hours total over the past 3 nights. She walked into the kitchen, gripped the counter with both hands, and waited for her hands to stop shaking. Later that day, Brian sent another message. "Brian, remember, love doesn't keep score. It just gives." She stared at that line for a long time. Then she opened her recorder. Entry 028, 5:31 p.m. Blood sugar incident. Recovered. "Mom blamed me. Brian says love doesn't keep score. But I wonder if it doesn't keep score. How do you know who's playing fair?" She saved it. Then for the first time in weeks, she sat in the sun on the back porch. And for 10 whole minutes, she didn't answer when someone called her name. Under the blue-tinted hallway light at 2:47 a.m., Alyssa crouched beside the hospital bed, wedged into the living room, trying to adjust the brace that had slipped from her father's left calf. His breathing was sharp and shallow, each inhale punctuated by a grimace. Sweat beaded along his brow, soaking into the pillow. "I told you to stop touching it," he growled, voice raw from pain. "I'm not touching it," Alyssa said calmly, fingers trembling despite her effort. "The brace is out of place. It's putting pressure on your spine." "I said leave it," he barked louder. The sound bouncing off the framed family portraits lining the walls, smiling faces from years past now watching in silent judgment. Alyssa paused, hands frozen midair, then slowly backed away, keeping her voice level. Okay, I'll stop. He groaned and shifted, which only worsened the pain. A low, wounded sound escaped him. Alyssa instinctively stepped forward again, arms ready. No, he barked. You already made it worse. Just leave me alone. She stepped back again. The air in the room was thick, choking. The smell of antiseptic mixed with stale sweat and resentment. She stood in the corner watching her father writhe, knowing any attempt to help might be used against her. From the hallway, her mother's voice echoed sharply. Alyssa, what are you doing? Margaret appeared in a nightgown, eyes narrowed and furious. I didn't do anything, Alyssa said. He was already... You must have moved him wrong. You always rush everything. You don't listen. I was trying to realign the... Don't talk back, Margaret snapped, brushing past her daughter and kneeling beside the bed. Jimmy, sweetheart, are you okay? Breathe with me. In and out, in and out. Alyssa stood still, jaw clenched. Her own chest burned from the effort not to scream, not to cry, not to shout, I'm doing everything I can while you stand there judging me from the sidelines. But instead, she turned and walked silently into the kitchen. There in the dark, she picked up her phone, opened the recorder, and pressed record. Her voice was hushed low, almost trembling. Entry 038, 3:04 a.m. Dad had a pain spike, tried to help, accused me of making it worse. Mom came in, called me reckless. I haven't slept since yesterday morning. She hit stop, then renamed the file Bang Chung, 3H Sang, Kon Dalva Trachmang. She saved it to the encrypted drive she'd created on her laptop 2 weeks earlier. It had started as a simple audio log to keep track of medications, schedules, and incidents. But it had evolved. Now each entry included more audio files, timestamps, emails, photos, proof. Because someday someone would ask her why she left. And she intended to be ready. Back in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, opening a Word document titled Care Journal. Alyssa Thornton. She typed quickly, fingers moving faster than her thoughts. 3:12 a.m. Woke up to Dad screaming. Pain in lower back, likely misaligned support pad. Attempted to adjust. He refused help. Verbal aggression. Mom entered. Accused me of worsening his condition. Called me reckless and careless. No one asked if I was okay. She saved the file. Then she copied the audio file from her phone into the folder titled Emotional Neglect, Parent Abuse, Recordings. Each file had a name. Each name told a story. Trakmang vi Fatuak Muan, 8:45 p.m. Doloy vi Matengu, 2:13 a.m. Sosan Voy Brian, 5:17 p.m. Migoy Lagan Neng, 6:29 a.m. It wasn't vengeance, not yet. It was protection, documentation, insurance against a future that might pretend she hadn't been there. By the time dawn crept in through the sheer curtains, Alyssa had logged 3 entries. Her neck ached, her eyes burned, but there was no time to stop. At 6:10 a.m., the alarm sounded for the morning meds. She rose, made her way back into the living room, and found her mother sitting quietly beside the bed. Her father was asleep, finally, breath steady, face slack with exhaustion. Margaret didn't look up. I'll take care of it, Alyssa said. I already gave him his pills, her mother replied flatly. You were resting. The words stung sharp and mocking. Okay. Alyssa turned and went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stared out the window. Down the street, a jogger passed by, earbuds and sweat glistening on his forehead. Freedom in motion, a life moving forward. She wondered not for the first time if she'd ever run again, if her muscles even remembered how. At 8:15 a.m., a cousin came by to drop off soup, beef stew, and cornbread in Tupperware. You're an angel, the cousin said, handing Alyssa the containers. I'm trying. I mean it, she continued. Taking care of Uncle Jimmy like this? Not many women your age would. Most are too busy chasing careers or husbands. Alyssa smiled thinly. Then came the line inevitable and poison-laced. Maybe God kept you single for this reason. She nodded politely, shut the door, and walked to the recorder. Entry 039, 8:20 a.m. Cousin Lisa dropped off food. Called me an angel. Suggested God kept me single to take care of Dad. I'm starting to believe people think my suffering is part of some divine design. Click, save, 10 file, duak ban fuak bang suhai sin, 8:20 a.m. By noon, her back ached from bending over to clean the shower bench. Her arms shook as she lifted her father into his chair again. He groaned the whole time. Her mother stood behind them both, saying nothing but letting out the occasional disapproving sigh. When Alyssa set him down carefully, gently, her father let out a soft curse. She always drops me like I'm a sack of potatoes. I didn't drop you, she said quietly. Her mother frowned. Maybe if you'd been more careful. Alyssa turned to her, slowly, voice sharper than usual. I've been careful for 14 months. Silence. Her mother blinked but said nothing. That night, as Alyssa soaked her wrists in hot water to ease the swelling, Brian texted. Brian, her dad had another pain episode. I know it's hard, but stay strong. God gives us these roles because he knows we can handle them. Then another, your strength is inspiring. Don't let the frustration turn you bitter. Remember, love doesn't complain. Alyssa stared at the screen, her face expressionless. Then she opened the drive, created a new folder titled Brian, Tin Nun Dao Duke, and uploaded the screenshots. At 11:02 p.m., she opened her journal again. Today's summary: total care hours 16, emotional support none received, appreciation 0, accusations 4, reckless, careless, ungrateful, too sensitive, files added 3, audio 2, screenshots. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and added, I am documenting this because I am scared that if I don't, no one will believe I was ever here. And that thought broke her. Not the work, not the exhaustion, but the idea that her silence could be used as evidence that nothing ever happened, that she was never burdened, that she was never bruised. So she typed and saved and backed up everything. Because somewhere deep in her gut, Alyssa knew a storm was coming, and this time she would not be caught unarmed. Under the flickering glow of the living room TV, Alyssa sat on the floor with her legs folded beneath her, sorting through a box of wound care supplies. Gauze adhesive pads, sterile gloves, a new catheter kit. She labeled each item with color-coded stickers she had printed herself. Organization wasn't just survival anymore. It was the only way she still recognized her own intelligence. Behind her, her father dozed in his chair, breathing in that shallow, rattling rhythm that now served as background music to her every hour. Her mother was busy in the kitchen preparing for what she called a family moment, which meant wiping down the table and setting out mismatched mugs for coffee no one really wanted. On the counter, propped up and waiting, was Margaret's iPad, already logged into Zoom camera, angled just right, waiting for the big call from Brian. He had something to announce. Alyssa hadn't asked. She didn't need to. She'd already seen the LinkedIn update that morning. Brian Thornton, nominated for Regional VP of Global Talent Strategy. Alyssa had stared at the screen for a full minute, jaw slack, coffee cooling in her hand. The same hand that had held her father's vomit bucket the night before. The same hand that had wiped feces from the tile floor after his medication had gone wrong. The same hand that now clicked like on her brother's promotion post, just to avoid being noticed for not supporting him. Come on, sweetheart, her mother called, now voice soft but insistent. He said he's calling right at 4. He has something special planned. Alyssa stood up, wiped her hands on a towel, and walked over to the dining table. Her mother had laid out the good china. Not the full set, just 2 teacups with blue roses and cracks hidden under gold-rimmed saucers. The screen flickered to life, and there was Brian. Dressed in a pale blue dress shirt with sleeves rolled just enough to show his watch hair combed back with the kind of effortless gloss that said he'd either just gotten out of a salon or never sweated a day in his life. Behind him was a hotel suite, modern, sleek ocean visible through the glass behind him. Hi, family, he beamed. You all look great. His mother clapped softly like she was watching a child in a school play. Oh, Brian, look at you. You look so professional. James, groggy and half aware, lifted his hand in a weak wave. Hey, son. Alyssa stayed silent. Brian cleared his throat with mock formality. I have a little news to share. This week, the board at Stratwell Group officially nominated me for Regional VP of Global Talent Strategy. It's not public yet, we're finalizing contracts, but I wanted my family to hear it first. Oh my goodness, Margaret gasped, hands over her heart. I'm so proud of you. James mumbled something unintelligible. It didn't matter. Brian kept going. I wouldn't be where I am without the values this family gave me. The work ethic, the empathy, the sense of service. He paused, gaze settling directly into the lens like he was on stage. And I especially want to thank 2 people. First, Mom, for raising me with such unwavering belief in my potential. You've always known I was meant to lead even when I didn't believe it myself. Margaret sniffled, her eyes bright. And second, Brian, continued, my sister Alyssa. Alyssa's stomach twisted. Her spine straightened reflexively. You've shown what real sacrifice looks like, he said. Stepping away from your career, being there for Mom and Dad, doing what's right even when it's hard. You remind me that titles and bonuses mean nothing without character. Alyssa swallowed the acid rising in her throat. Brian smiled warmly. So this nomination, it belongs to all of us, but especially you, sis. Thank you. The call ended with claps, kisses blown into the screen, and a flurry of so proud of us from their mother. When the screen went black, the silence was unbearable. Margaret turned to her daughter, glowing with satisfaction. Didn't that feel good? He's such a thoughtful man. Alyssa didn't reply. She walked into the kitchen and began rinsing out the catheter basin. Her hands moved on autopilot, but her mind was screaming. That speech, it wasn't gratitude. It was performance. A carefully rehearsed, PR-friendly tribute to the dutiful sister who was never allowed to speak. He had turned her into a moral footnote, a symbol, a story. She wasn't a sister, she was a prop. She dried her hands, opened her laptop, and started a new entry in the journal. 4:37 p.m., Brian's VP announcement call. Called Mom his inspiration, called me an example of sacrifice, framed my unpaid labor as noble, said my actions gave his success meaning, did not ask how I'm doing, did not ask if I want to go back to work, turned me into a parable for humility. I am not a lesson, I am a person. Then she saved the Zoom recording and uploaded it to her secure folder under the title, Brian, Bai Fat Bu, An Huang Dao Duk to Alyssa. The name made her skin crawl. Later that night, Alyssa lay in bed, phone screen dim against the darkness. Brian had messaged again. Brian, hope that wasn't too much, sis. Just wanted you to feel seen. Brian, you're doing sacred work. Not everyone gets to be a legacy like that. She didn't reply. She recorded instead. Entry 045, Brian believes I should feel honored to be thanked like a servant. He thinks acknowledgement is a reward, but recognition without agency is just another form of erasure. She stared at the ceiling after that. Legacy. What a beautiful word to use for someone whose labor you've stolen and reframed as a character-building anecdote. In the following days, the family group chat buzzed with relatives offering congratulations to Brian. Aunt Lila sent a video of her reading the announcement on LinkedIn. Uncle Marty replied, all those leadership retreats paid off way to represent the family. No one asked Alyssa how her father's blood sugar scare had gone the night before. No one asked if she was eating or sleeping or breathing. But someone did comment under Brian's post. A former coworker of Alyssa's, Maria, from the marketing team had written, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy? Your sister's an absolute hero for stepping in. Hope she gets the recognition she deserves too. It had 6 likes. Brian hadn't replied to it. That night, Alyssa opened her laptop and stared at the files she'd accumulated, nearly 3 dozen recordings, 2 dozen screenshots, dozens of journal entries and email copies. It looked like a case file, a lawsuit waiting to be born. But it wasn't about court. Not yet. It was about proof. Proof that she hadn't just faded into the wallpaper. That her existence wasn't just a convenient story her family told to make themselves look generous and selfless. It was about being seen, truly seen. And for the first time, as she sat in the silence of a house she no longer considered hers, she realized something chilling. They never expected her to have a voice. They'd assumed she'd give, and when the giving broke her, she'd leave quietly, thanking them for the privilege. But she wasn't leaving quietly. She was documenting. And someday they'd hear everything. Under the faded light of a Tuesday morning, Alyssa stood at the kitchen sink watching the tea kettle begin to hiss. She was holding a form, another insurance adjustment from the home care provider, requesting a signature, clarification, and updated date. They always wanted something. She set it aside, glanced down the hallway toward her father's room, and exhaled slowly. She turned off the kettle before it could scream. The floor creaked behind her. Her mother appeared holding a crumpled grocery receipt and a bottle of Tylenol PM. I think he slept poorly again, Margaret said, voice tight with artificial calm. Maybe he needs a different pillow. Or maybe, Alyssa replied evenly, he needs to move around more. Sitting up a little might help. Margaret blinked. You think he's ready for that? It's been almost 5 months since the surgery. The last report said he could begin assisted sitting 2 weeks ago, with support. Her mother looked at her like she'd spoken a forbidden word. Support from who? From me, Alyssa answered, though something clenched in her throat as she said it. And maybe a PT aide, just a few hours a week. Margaret's lips flattened. We can't afford that. You know that. I know. Alyssa picked up the insurance document again, which is why I wanted to ask if he's making progress. Maybe I can start going back to work, even part-time. I got a message from my old manager. They might have a remote role available. Her mother's smile was immediate and brittle. Oh, Alyssa, she said gently. You're always so eager to run, so quick to move on. Alyssa froze. That's not what I said. Margaret leaned against the counter, her voice taking on the patronizing lilt that Alyssa had grown used to, honeyed, polished with disappointment. Sweetheart, I just think it's a little selfish to start thinking about yourself when we're still recovering as a family. Your father still needs you. I still need you. Alyssa looked down at her hands. Her knuckles were cracked from bleach and soap. Her nails were uneven, torn. Her body was always here, but no one seemed to notice how frayed she'd become. I need to think about my life too, she said quietly. That's when the smile slipped. Margaret's voice hardened. Oh, I see. So now we're a burden. Now after all we've done for you. You mean what I've done for you? Alyssa said louder than she meant to. Margaret stepped back like she'd been slapped. You've changed, she whispered. You used to be grateful. Alyssa didn't answer. She picked up the insurance form and walked out of the kitchen. In her room, she sat at the desk she'd reclaimed from the garage, now stacked high with folders, receipts, pill logs, appointment slips. She opened a new spreadsheet titled, Documented Hours, Care Contributions, Alyssa Thornton. She began listing diaper changes, estimated 420, wound dressing replacements, 96, insulin injections, 212, medical appointment coordination calls, 35, emergency incidents nighttime, 11, average daily care hours, 16. She didn't stop there. She opened her email inbox and began pulling together communications from doctors, physical therapists, and home supply vendors. Then she began calling each office, one by one. Hi, this is Alyssa Thornton. I'm the full-time caregiver for James Thornton. I'd like to request a copy of his PT progress report from the last 2 assessments. Yes, I'm authorized. I have power of attorney. Could you also send the evaluation about independent sitting milestones? Every conversation she recorded, not just notes, audio files. She gave them clear names. Call, PT assessment, independent sitting feasible. 0412 call, insurance denial appeal. 0328 call, home nurse confirms recovery timeline. 0402. It became a system. Not just a log of tasks, but a timeline of truth. She wasn't preparing for war, at least not yet, but she was done playing the role of the quiet daughter in the background of someone else's heroic family story. A few days later, she brought it up again. They were sitting in the living room, her father watching cable reruns, her mother folding laundry. I spoke with Dr. Connors, Alyssa said. Margaret didn't look up. She said we could start working on assisted sitting, maybe even self-feeding. Her mother kept folding. That's not what he wants. Alyssa turned to her father. Dad. He shrugged, eyes fixed on the screen. It's easier when you do it. That doesn't mean it's better. He's fragile, Margaret snapped. You think this is easy for him? I know it's not, Alyssa said, but you can't keep pretending he's incapable just because it makes everything more convenient. Her mother stood up, eyes flashing. Convenient. You think this is convenient for me? Watching my husband deteriorate in front of me, relying on my daughter to keep this house from falling apart. Alyssa took a deep breath. I think you don't want things to change, because if they do, I won't be needed anymore. And there it was. A truth too raw for either of them to say aloud. Margaret stormed out of the room. Her father didn't look at her. Later that night, Alyssa stood in the pantry door, cracked just enough to let in a sliver of light, holding her phone to her mouth. Entry Irfi 2. Today I asked when I could return to work. Mom said I was selfish. Dad didn't respond. I coordinated 3 calls, reordered medical supplies, and cooked dinner. No one said thank you. She saved the file as Trakmak Vihoy Dilam, 7:14 p.m. She then opened her camera and took pictures of every receipt she could find. Pharmacy statements, wheelchair accessory invoices, even shipping slips for bedpan covers. She emailed them to herself, then uploaded them to a folder titled, Expenses Not Reimbursed, Alyssa Thornton. The naming wasn't bitter, it was clinical, it was necessary. It was her paper trail. And still she tried to be reasonable. She drafted a sample care schedule showing how a paid nurse could take over a few tasks in the mornings, freeing up Alyssa for remote work. She printed it out, highlighted key items, and placed it on the kitchen counter. The next morning it was gone. Replaced by a note in Margaret's handwriting. We don't need strangers in our home. This family takes care of its own. Alyssa didn't say anything. She just opened her laptop and began compiling the phone calls into labeled folders. A week later, during the family video call, Brian chimed in from another continent. His backdrop this time was a minimalist co-working lounge in Switzerland. Mom said you've been asking about getting back to work, he said, smiling. I have, Alyssa replied flatly. Brian chuckled. Well, just don't burn out, okay? Remember, this is a season. It's not forever. She stared at the screen. Brian, she said, tone calm and even, do you know how many hours I've spent caring for Dad since you left? He blinked. Over 1-800. He laughed like she was joking. She didn't smile. Brian sobered. Okay, wow, that's okay, I didn't realize. I know. The call ended awkwardly. Her mother didn't speak to her for the rest of the night. Alyssa didn't mind. She opened her journal and typed, Tonight I realized they don't want me to leave because they care. They want me to stay because it's easier than admitting they failed to show up. I'm not asking for thanks anymore. I'm building my own record of truth. And one day they'll hear it, whether they're ready or not. It was meatloaf again, dry overcooked the same way Margaret made it every Thursday, as if repetition could pass for comfort. Alyssa sat at the dinner table across from her father, who was reclined in his wheelchair with a blanket tucked around his legs. Her mother moved about the kitchen with the familiar rhythm of practiced martyrdom, setting down plates with loud clinks that weren't quite accidents. The TV played softly in the background, some rerun of a game show no one was watching. Alyssa had spent the day coordinating 2 prescription renewals, replacing a leaking catheter bag, and disinfecting the shower seat after another incident no one talked about. Her back ached, her head throbbed. Her inbox at work had quietly grown from neglected to irrelevant. She reached for her water, cleared her throat, and said it softly. Almost too softly. I've been thinking about going back, just part-time, remote. Margaret froze in place, her hands still on the casserole dish. James looked up from his plate, brow furrowing. Going back where? My job, Alyssa said. Renee said there's an opening. I could work from home, still help here, but also, to what James interrupted. So you can sit in your room all day while your mother wipes my ass. The words fell like broken glass. Margaret sighed long and theatrical and moved toward the sink. She didn't look at her daughter. I wouldn't do that, Alyssa said quickly. I'd still take care of things, just balance it more. James snorted. You already disappear half the day. What do you think this is a vacation? You think it's hard wiping a few counters and setting alarms. The silence after that was deafening. Even the TV seemed to mute itself. Alyssa's heart thudded hard in her chest. She hadn't expected a thank you. She'd stopped expecting that months ago. But this dismissal, this insult, I'm not disappearing, she said, her voice shaking. I'm asking to have a life again. James didn't miss a beat. You've been a shadow in this house since you got here, a ghost. Don't pretend now like you're carrying us. Margaret didn't flinch, didn't turn around, just rinsed a glass and set it upside down in the rack. That did it. Alyssa stood up slowly, her chair scraping back against the tile floor. No one looked up. She walked to the patio door, slid it open, and stepped outside into the cool evening air. The wind hit her like a slap, sharp and grounding. Cicadas hummed in the trees, and someone down the block was barbecuing. Actual ordinary life was still happening out here, somewhere. She collapsed onto the wooden bench beneath the patio, Light pulled her phone from her hoodie pocket and opened the audio folder. Her thumb hovered over a file. Entry 039 Bigoyla Kaibong Buatoy. She listened. Just for a moment, her father's voice clear and cutting. You've been a shadow in this house since you got here, a ghost. She paused the playback, then without thinking, without planning, she opened her email app. To compliance@stratwellglobal.com, cchrteam.globalstratwellgroup, subject regarding a family that isn't what it seems. She stared at the blank body of the email. Her fingers hovered, shook. What was she doing? Exposing Brian for what, being the golden son, pretending she didn't exist. But this wasn't about Brian, not really. It was about the image he had built of being raised in a family of values, honor, selflessness. He built his credibility on the back of that story. The humble son of a retired engineer and a homemaker. The strong daughter who stepped up when needed. He didn't step up, he didn't even show up, she did. And now her father, who she had carried through every bowel movement and blood pressure spike, had called her a ghost. A shadow. She wasn't disappearing. She was being erased. She pressed record. Dear Stratwell Compliance Team, she began, voice steady. Attached is an audio recording from tonight's dinner in the Thornton household. My name is Alyssa Thornton, and for the past 14 months, I've been the full-time unpaid caregiver to James Thornton, father of your leadership nominee, Brian Thornton. She paused, swallowed. While Brian speaks often about our family values, what he doesn't mention is that he hasn't visited our father once since the injury, that he sends messages praising sacrifice without ever offering to share the burden, that my labor, my identity has been packaged and sold as part of a narrative he's built for personal gain. She hit stop, attached the file. She didn't hit send, not yet. Instead, she saved the draft and named it, Draft Stratwell Family Facade. Back inside, the table had been cleared, her plate scraped into the sink untouched. The house had already moved on without her. She walked past the kitchen silently. Her mother didn't look up from her crossword puzzle. As Alyssa reached the stairs, Margaret said softly, You always have to make things about you, don't you? Alyssa stopped but didn't turn around. I asked for a way to keep helping, she said. You all made it clear that helping isn't enough. I have to disappear too. Her mother didn't respond. In her room, Alyssa stared at the email draft. Her hand hovered over her mouse. She didn't cry, not anymore. Not even when the person you wiped blood off turned around and said you were a ghost. But something inside her cracked. A slow, deep crack, not the sound of breaking glass, but of something shifting under years of weight. The draft would stay for now, but something had already been released. A dam unstopped. She opened her voice recorder one last time for the night. Entry 060, called a shadow, a ghost. When I said I wanted a part of my life back, I was told I never existed in the first place. I don't need them to validate me. I just need them to stop pretending I'm not real. She saved it. And for the first time in a long time, Alyssa slept without setting an alarm. The coffee shop sat on a quiet corner of downtown, tucked between a dry cleaner and a yoga studio, the kind of place that still served cappuccinos in ceramic mugs and didn't blast music over the conversations people needed to have. Alyssa stood outside for a moment before going in, clutching a flash drive in her coat pocket like it might vanish if she loosened her grip. She spotted Marin instantly, same sharp bob, same quick eyes that once could read an office room like a chessboard. They hadn't spoken face-to-face in nearly 2 years. Not since Alyssa had left the agency to help her father walk again, which ironically had never happened. Marin waved her over. I ordered your usual, almond milk, extra hot, 3 sugars. Don't tell me you've changed. Alyssa smiled faintly, sitting down. I've changed, just not that part. The small talk was brief. Marin was never one for delay when something serious was coming. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. So, you said you had something about Brian? Alyssa reached into her bag and placed the flash drive on the table. She didn't push it across yet. I'm not here to destroy him, she said. I want to make that clear. This isn't revenge, this is transparency. Marin raised an eyebrow. Transparency. He's being considered for the regional VP role, right? HR Global. Marin gave a cautious nod. It's between him and one other guy. But Brian's favored. He's been using his family background and all his leadership branding values, legacy, personal responsibility. Alyssa inhaled. He's used me as a talking point, Marin. He tells stories about the sister who stayed behind to take care of Dad like it's some heartwarming anecdote. But he hasn't been here. Not once. He hasn't paid for a dime of care, hasn't called more than once a month, and every time he does, it's a PR show for our parents. Marin didn't speak. Alyssa pushed the flash drive forward. These are audio logs, phone recordings, email threads, photos, a copy of the journal I've kept dates, tasks, hours, breakdowns of medical supplies. It's not edited to humiliate him. It's not dramatic. It's just the truth. He's built an image on something that isn't real. Marin looked down at the flash drive. Her fingers tapped lightly against the side of her coffee mug. He's made family stewardship part of his leadership identity, Alyssa continued. He talks about integrity, duty, sacrifice. He gets praised for my labor, and I don't even get the dignity of being seen. Marin finally looked up. Do you want us to take him down? Alyssa shook her head. I want you to look. Just look. Ask yourself if what he's presenting is real and if it matters that it's not. I'm not asking for a payout. I'm not asking for you to choose sides. But you're giving us ammo, Marin said. Not judgmental, just blunt. I'm giving you facts, Alyssa replied. Whatever happens after that, it's yours to decide. They sat in silence for a few moments. Then Marin reached out, took the flash drive, and slid it into her coat pocket. I'll read through it tonight, she said. I can't promise anything immediate, but if what you're saying is consistent with what's on this drive, it is. Marin nodded. Then you did the right thing. Alyssa felt her shoulders drop just slightly. Not relief, but something close. When they parted, Marin paused before she walked away. You always were the backbone of that family. Everyone at the agency knew that. I'm sorry it took you breaking to show it. Alyssa didn't cry. Not there, not yet. That night, she sat at her desk with the windows open and the journal file still pulled up. She added a new entry. 8:43 p.m. Handed over the evidence today, not for revenge, not for punishment, just to correct the record. For once, I want the truth to walk into the room before the myth does. She clicked save and closed the file. Then she returned to her inbox. There already waiting was an auto-reply confirmation from Stratwell Global Compliance. Thank you. Your documentation has been received. A member of our team will follow up if necessary. That was all. No drama, no escalation. But somewhere inside a boardroom, somewhere clean and distant, Brian's spotless image now had a crack in it. Not sabotage, just truth. And that was enough for now. Under the pale hum of the living room lamp, the atmosphere had shifted. There was something brittle in the air like glass just before it shatters. Alyssa could feel it even before her mother spoke a word. It had been 2 days since she met Marin. 1 day since she'd received a notification in her inbox from Stratwell Global. Your report has initiated a formal internal review process. Thank you for your cooperation. By morning, the news had found its way back home. Margaret stood by the dining table, her hands gripping the edge like she needed the support. Her face was rigid-lined, not just with age, but with disbelief. Across the room, James sat slouched in his wheelchair, eyes cast toward the television, though the screen was off. He hadn't spoken yet. The house was silent except for the sound of Margaret's breath, ragged, uneven, boiling beneath the surface. They called this morning, she said finally, not looking at Alyssa. Stratwell, Human Resources. Alyssa didn't pretend to be confused. She met her mother's voice with calm. I know. Margaret slowly turned her head. You know. They followed up, Alyssa said, as they should. Margaret let out a short, bitter laugh. They asked us to confirm things about Brian. About the calls, the dates, the care. They wanted to know if what you said was true. And what did you say? Alyssa asked softly. Her mother's mouth tightened. I said nothing. I hung up. Of course she had. Denial was easier than acknowledgement. James shifted in his chair but didn't speak. Then Margaret stepped closer, pointing a trembling finger at her daughter. You couldn't let him have this, could you? He was doing so well. He had finally made something of himself, and you had to rip it down. Why to feel powerful? To feel important. Alyssa stood motionless. I didn't rip anything down, she said quietly. I told the truth. Margaret's voice cracked, sharp and ugly. You betrayed your own brother. No, Alyssa replied. I stopped protecting a lie. Silence. Her mother stared at her like she didn't recognize her. Like the daughter who had bathed her father, cleaned the blood off the tile, held every pill bottle and medical bill and exhaustion in her hands for over a year, was suddenly a stranger because she dared to speak. Brian's been suspended pending the investigation. Margaret said, her voice colder now. They've locked his work email, his access, his travel account. Alyssa closed her eyes. I warned him, she said. You warned him, Margaret spat. What kind of person warns someone right before stabbing them in the back? What kind of person builds a career pretending someone else's pain is their testimony? Alyssa shot back, her voice rising, now shaking. I fed Dad through a straw. I caught him when he fell in the shower. I haven't slept a full night in 14 months. And Brian, he was out giving speeches about sacrifice like he was the one bleeding. Her voice broke on the last word. James finally looked up. You always wanted the spotlight, didn't you? He said. It took her a moment to realize he was speaking to her. You hated that Brian was the success story. That he got out, got recognition. You've resented it your whole life." She stared at him in disbelief. Her throat dried. "I didn't resent it," she whispered. "I resented being erased." Margaret stepped between them like she was protecting her husband from a stranger. "Get out," she said, "before you do more damage." Alyssa stared at them, two people she had once thought would understand who now stood in front of her, like a wall she'd never break through. She turned without a word and walked to her room. Inside, everything was quiet, frozen. Her laptop was still open on her desk, the last journal entry blinking on the screen. 8:43 p.m. The call came today. The masks are slipping. She packed slowly. A duffel bag, her journal, the folders from her desk. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't tremble. It was in a strange way peaceful, like walking away from a burning building you finally accept you cannot save. Before leaving, she took one sheet of printer paper and wrote the only sentence that felt right. "I didn't betray anyone, I just stopped dying in silence." She folded the note in half and placed it on the kitchen counter. Then she opened the door. No one followed her. The night was cold, but she didn't pull her coat tighter. She didn't rush. She walked down the driveway, past the overgrown rose bush, past the broken porch light that Brian said he'd fix but never did. She opened the car door, tossed her bag in, and drove. She didn't cry. Not that night. She drove to a motel on the edge of town, $59 a night cash. The carpet smelled like bleach and cigarettes. The sheets were thin, but for the first time in over a year, no one needed her at 3 a.m. No one expected her to explain why she was tired or prove why she deserved rest. She sat at the edge of the bed, opened her laptop, and stared at her inbox. There was a new message from Stratwell HR. Subject: formal ethics review, statement request. She didn't open it yet. Instead, she opened a blank document and began to type. "They always said I was the one who couldn't let go. What they never saw was that they were holding me underwater while asking me to smile." Then she closed the laptop, turned off the light, and let the silence have her. Because for once, silence wasn't punishment. It was hers. The room was small, 12 by 12 at best. The walls were yellowing from age, not paint, and the mattress sat on a wooden platform that groaned every time Alyssa turned in her sleep. Not that she slept much. She'd found the place through a cashier at the bookstore 2 blocks down, an under-the-table kind of rental cheap enough to afford on her part-time pay and anonymous enough that no one asked questions. The window overlooked the back alley of a laundromat, and the only sounds at night were the hum of vending machines and the stray clang of a dumpster lid closing. It was nothing, and it was hers. By the second night, the silence began to hurt. It wasn't the physical emptiness that unnerved her. It was the absence of alarm clocks, the lack of door creaks in the night, of IV machine beeps, of her father's low groans from the next room. It was the absence of duty. She had dreamed for months of this very stillness, and now it pressed in like suffocation. On the fourth night, Alyssa sat on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, her phone buzzing on the mattress behind her. An email, then another. She didn't check them. She stared at the peeling baseboard instead and thought about the 1,000 different versions of herself that still lived in that house. The ghost her father had called her. The mule her mother had ridden into martyrdom. The sister who was never enough and yet always too much. What she felt wasn't relief. It was guilt. Crushing, irrational, but real. She had told the truth, and somehow it felt like betrayal. She hadn't spoken to anyone since she left. Not her mother, not her father, not even Brian. She told herself this was strength, that silence was clarity. But when the shadows got long and the air in the room felt too thick to breathe, she wasn't so sure anymore. It was loneliness. It was abandonment, but reversed. She had walked away. She had left them. No one came looking. By the end of the week, she found herself whispering aloud to the walls, to no one, practicing explanations, rationalizations, apologies she swore she'd never give. Until one night her body betrayed her. She woke at 3:17 a.m. in full panic, heart racing, sheets damp with sweat, fingers trembling so hard she couldn't open her phone. She curled up into herself, pressing her hands over her ears, willing the world to go away. But there was no one coming down the hallway to soothe her, no duty to distract her, only the pain, raw and shapeless, circling in her chest. By dawn, she picked up the phone and scrolled through her contacts. She passed Mom, Brian, Dad, kept scrolling, then stopped. Dr. Jean Monroe, therapist. She hadn't seen Dr. Monroe in over a year, not since her last work-provided session at the marketing agency. But the number was still saved. She stared at it for several long minutes, thumb hovering. She almost closed the app. But then, like breaking surface after too long underwater, she pressed the call icon. It rang twice. Then again, she was about to hang up when the voicemail clicked on. "You've reached the office of Dr. Jean Monroe. I'm unavailable to take your call, but if you are a current or former patient in distress, please leave a detailed message with your phone number. I'll return your call as soon as I can." The beep came like a dare. Alyssa breathed once, twice, then spoke. "Hi, Dr. Monroe. This is Alyssa Thornton. I used to be one of your clients. from the Stratton agency. I don't know if you remember me. She paused, her voice quaking. I don't really know what I need. I think I need someone to help me make sense of this. Everything feels wrong, even the parts that were supposed to feel right. She stopped, that was enough. She hung up and sat still. For the first time since she walked away from her family, the tears came. They weren't loud. They didn't crash through her like a storm. They came in slow, aching waves, soaking her shirt, her sleeves, the cheap blanket she wrapped around herself. And she let them. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't apologize to the empty room. The next morning, Dr. Monroe called back. Her voice was gentle, professional, but warm. I remember you, Alyssa, she said. You came in talking about how tired you were, but you never let yourself admit why. Alyssa didn't say much on that call, just enough to schedule a session, virtual for now. By the weekend, they were sitting face-to-face through a laptop screen. Dr. Monroe had the same softly lit office, the same carefully angled bookshelf in the background. But now the questions were sharper, the pauses heavier. I'm not sure what I want, Alyssa said at one point, her hands folded tightly. I thought I wanted peace, but now that I have it, it feels like grief. Dr. Monroe nodded slowly. Because you lost the version of yourself that you were holding together, she said. And the people who made you carry everything didn't notice when you put it down. Alyssa's throat tightened. They think I betrayed them, she said. Did you? No, she said, then hesitated. I told the truth. Dr. Monroe let the silence hold. Then she said, and what do you think they're mourning, the truth or the story they built without it? That landed like a stone. Alyssa didn't answer. She didn't have to. That session opened something in her. Not healing, not yet, but a door. In the days that followed, Alyssa began to move differently. Her job at the bookstore became more than just a paycheck. She started to talk to customers casually at first, then more. There was a woman who came every Thursday for poetry, a man who browsed old cookbooks but never bought, a teenage girl who sat cross-legged in the corner with fantasy novels headphones in but one ear always alert. They didn't know her story, and they didn't need to. They saw her as she was now, not as someone's daughter, not as someone's sister, not as a caregiver. Just Alyssa. She still had nights where she couldn't sleep, still had emails from Stratwell piling up unread, still had questions she couldn't answer. But she kept going. Every morning she walked 3 blocks to the shop. Every week she met with Dr. Monroe. And every time her guilt whispered, you abandoned them, she whispered back, no, I found myself. Healing wasn't cinematic. It was dull, repetitive, full of setbacks. But it was real, and it belonged to her. It was a Sunday morning, the kind of overcast, drizzly day where time feels like it's caught in a loop. The bookstore was quiet, only 2 customers browsing and the soft hum of indie jazz playing overhead. Alyssa was behind the counter organizing a shipment of remainders when her phone buzzed on silent. She glanced at it. A single message. From mom text, Brian is thinking about suing you for defamation. Says you cost him everything. Are you happy now? Alyssa stared at the screen for a long time, fingers frozen mid-motion over the scan gun. No greeting, no context, just a sharp-pointed blade disguised as a question. Are you happy now? She didn't respond. Instead, she locked the phone and slid it back into her pocket. The customer at the counter smiled as they paid for a memoir. Alyssa smiled back. Her voice was even polite, practiced. But her mind buzzed. Brian suing? Of course he was. He wouldn't go down quietly. He never had. He couldn't afford to admit the mask had slipped. By noon, she had convinced herself to go for a walk during her break. The sky had begun to clear, slightly pale gray, peeling back into hesitant blue, and she welcomed the wind against her face as she stepped outside. Her phone rang. It was a name she hadn't seen pop up since the coffee shop. Marin? She answered without hesitation. Hey, she said. Hey, Marin replied, her voice neutral but not cold. You got a minute? Yeah, Alyssa said, crossing the street, walking toward the park, where teenagers were kicking a deflated soccer ball between patches of dead grass. I wanted to let you know before you heard it somewhere else, Brian formally withdrew from the VP candidacy last night. Alyssa's steps slowed. He what? He stepped down, sent an internal memo to the selection board citing personal reasons and increased family complications. Marin paused. He's not being fired, but they've removed him from all external-facing projects. No keynote speeches, no mentorship appearances, no media. Alyssa exhaled, not triumphantly, just slowly. He said he was thinking about suing me, she murmured. Marin snorted. He floated it in a meeting. Legal shut it down. The documentation was too clean. The recordings, the logs, you made your case without embellishment. HR called it a model of ethical concern. Someone even forwarded it to the Ethics Compliance Board for future training material. Alyssa didn't know what to say. They thanked you, Marin continued. I mean it. One of the directors said, and I quote, it's rare someone steps in before a scandal explodes. Ms. Thornton gave us the truth while we still had time to act on it. Silence stretched between them. I didn't do it to be a whistleblower, Alyssa said finally. I didn't want to be erased. I know, Marin said, and I think they get that now. Alyssa sat down on a bench watching two kids climb a jungle gym. Their laughter carried over the breeze. So what happens to him now, she asked. He'll probably relocate, Marin said, maybe rebrand, pivot his image, but he's not going to forget this. I don't need him to, Alyssa replied. I just needed me to remember it. Marin was quiet a moment, then said, if you ever want to come back to agency work, I have a desk for you. Alyssa smiled, touched and surprised. Thank you, really, but for now, I'm okay in the quiet. Fair enough, Marin said. Just don't disappear, okay? You did something that matters. They hung up. Alyssa sat with the weight of it all, this strange, bittersweet victory. She hadn't burned down her brother's life. She hadn't thrown grenades for revenge. She had simply told the truth, and the world surprisingly had believed her. But it hadn't healed everything. Her mother still saw her as the betrayer. Her father hadn't reached out. The house that had once been her world now existed like a distant planet, rotating far from the orbit of her new one-bedroom life. Still, she had this. A bench in the sun, a job where no one measured her worth against someone else's ambition. A voice that was finally irrevocably hers. She took out her phone again and opened her voice memo app. Entry 078, Brian stepped down, she whispered. They saw me. Not the edited version, not the supporting character, just me. And it wasn't vengeance, it was validation. She hit stop. Then, against her better judgment, she opened her mother's message again. Brian is thinking about suing you for defamation. Says you cost him everything. Are you happy now? This time she tapped out a reply. He cost himself everything. I just stopped helping him hide it. She didn't hit send. Instead, she saved it to drafts. Some silences she realized still served her better. It came on a Thursday. The email. Alyssa was reorganizing the self-help section of the bookstore, pulling older titles, rotating new ones to eye level when her phone buzzed. She felt it in her pocket, but didn't look right away. She was in a rhythm. It wasn't until her break tucked in the corner of the storage room with a lukewarm tea that she finally checked her inbox. Subject: no one else to say this to. From Brian Thornton. She stared at it. The sender name alone made her pulse tighten. She clicked. The body of the email was long, more than 1,000 words broken into large, messy paragraphs with no greeting and no sign-off. Just words. Raw, frantic, confessional. I told myself I wouldn't write, that I didn't owe you that, but it turns out I do. Not because you demanded it, but because there's no one else who knows the real shape of what happened. Alyssa's eyes moved down the screen slowly. I built a version of myself, one I thought the world needed to see. The successful son, the example of dignity. I used you in the background of that image because I assumed you would stay there, and when you didn't, I felt exposed. I told myself you were jealous, or bitter, that it was some kind of vendetta. But after reading the logs, listening to even one of the recordings you sent, I realized I failed. Not just at being a brother, at being a man, at being honest. He went on. There were parts where he tried to justify his choices, claiming distance, pressure, ambition, but they read like someone trying to convince himself more than her. They said I could have kept my position if I'd fought harder, if I'd spun it, but I couldn't. Not when the evidence was so cold, clinical. You didn't scream, you didn't accuse, you just documented. That's what destroyed me. Alyssa paused there, breathing shallow. He wasn't wrong. She hadn't thrown a fit. She hadn't launched a campaign. She hadn't demanded apology or payout. She had shown her work. That was the part no one expected: the meticulousness, the way she'd turned invisible labor into data, into story. Back on the screen, his words twisted. You may have ruined my career, but you also made me see the version of me I had become. And I hate it. But I think I hate the man who let you carry it all alone even more. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know why I'm writing, except so I need someone to know that I see it now. I see what I did. And then one line, simple. I failed because of you, but also because of me. Alyssa closed the email. She didn't reply. There was nothing she needed to say, not to him. Instead, that night, she opened her laptop and launched a new blog. She had been toying with the idea for weeks, ever since Dr. Monroe encouraged her to write beyond the journal. People need this, the therapist had said. The world doesn't hear enough from the ones who give everything in silence. The title of the blog was quiet, unassuming. The care we never speak about. Its tagline, stories from those who stayed. Her first post started with Brian's line, I failed because of you, but also because of me. Alyssa didn't identify him, didn't name names. But the post that followed was a powerful, pointed unraveling of what it meant to be the one who stays, who lifts, who gives until there's nothing left to give and then still gives more. She wrote not with fury, but with clarity. She described the micro-traumas, the 3 a.m. medication alarms, the dinners skipped to scrub vomit from tile floors, the birthdays forgotten, the friends who stopped inviting her out because she always said no. She wrote about the invisibility, the way people called her an angel in public and a burden behind closed doors. She wrote about the emotional contortion of being grateful for the opportunity to care and resentful for never being given a choice. It wasn't bitter. It was brave. By morning, the post had 37 shares. By noon, over 200. Comments began to pour in. I've never felt seen until this post. This is my life. Thank you for giving it words. No one ever thanks the caregivers. They just expect us to disappear. A woman named Ray messaged her privately. She ran a support group in upstate Vermont for long-term family caregivers. Would Alyssa consider speaking on a virtual panel next month? A man in Oregon wrote that he printed out her post and gave it to his adult daughter, who'd been caring for his wife in silence. She cried when she read it, he wrote. Not because it hurt, but because someone else finally understood. Alyssa sat on her bed staring at the screen, her heart thudding. This was not vengeance. This was revolution. Quiet, intimate, but real. The kind of rebellion that doesn't tear down, it uncovers. Her words weren't about Brian anymore. They weren't about proving anything to her parents. They were about naming the ache so others didn't have to carry it alone. She posted again a week later, then again the next. Each post bled truth. Each one lifted someone else. And with every entry, she healed not in a grand cinematic way, but in the kind that builds new muscle where old wounds had been. She never replied to Brian's email. She never needed to. The echo of his admission was enough. And from that echo, she built something enduring, not out of pain, but out of witness. The building was nothing remarkable from the outside. A flat-roof, two-story structure on a quiet stretch between a laundromat and a vacant nail salon. The sign was modest, almost forgettable. The Quiet Hands Project, support for family caregivers. But inside it was something else entirely. Warm lighting, reclaimed wood furniture, bulletin boards dotted with handwritten thank you notes and printed flyers. There was a coffee station stocked with fair trade beans and donated mugs. One wall held a bookshelf labeled Leave One, Take One, filled with caregiving guides, grief memoirs, and books whose spines had been softened by years of hands just like Alyssa's. She didn't build it overnight. It had taken 6 months of part-time work, late-night grant applications, and one major partnership with the Vermont Community Health Foundation. But now it was real. Her center. Her space. For people like her, those who gave without applause, who burned themselves down to keep others warm, Alyssa had never been good at asking for help, but she had become good at creating places where others could. The idea had started with her blog. After the post quoting Brian's email, her readership exploded. Not viral in a celebrity way, but in that steady seismic way where strangers found her because they were searching for themselves. She began posting weekly. Essays, resources, interview transcripts with elder law attorneys, templates for medical record keeping, checklists for financial planning, lists of therapist directories who specialized in caregiver trauma. Her inbox overflowed. One email came from the woman in Missouri who had been taking care of her husband for 8 years. Another from a teenage boy in Florida who had dropped out of college to care for his grandmother. One woman wrote only 4 words. I thought I was alone. Alyssa cried that night, quietly, fiercely. Then she wrote back. To all of them. Every single one. It wasn't long before the blog wasn't enough. She started hosting virtual town halls, moderated Zoom rooms where strangers logged in and told their stories, sometimes for the first time in their lives. It was in one of those meetings, hearing a woman sob as she admitted she resented her own children for not helping with their father's care, that Alyssa realized what was missing. A place in the real world. A location. A center where people could go. Where they could rest or ask or cry or simply be. She used her savings, applied for a micro grant, and rented the building. She painted it herself, off-white walls, gentle green accents. Recruited 2 retired nurses to volunteer. Hired a trauma-informed social worker part-time. Worked with local businesses for donations. She named it the Quiet Hands Project because that's what she had been for so long. Quiet hands doing the work no one talked about. But now she wasn't quiet anymore. Opening day, the front room was packed. People from all over the county came. Not just caregivers, doctors, social workers, even local journalists who had followed her blog. There were no speeches, no ribbon cutting, just a handwritten sign that read, "Come in, sit down, you matter here." That was enough. Weeks later, a producer from Vermont Public Access called. She'd read the blog, visited the center, wanted Alyssa to speak on their weekly feature, Ordinary Heroes. Alyssa almost said no. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had broken and rebuilt and still had scars. But Dr. Monroe encouraged her, not for the recognition, she said, but because someone needs to see what surviving looks like. The day of the taping, Alyssa wore her simplest dress, navy blue cotton long-sleeved. She sat beneath studio lights that felt a little too bright and across from a host with kind eyes. The segment was only 15 minutes, but it changed everything. The host asked her to introduce herself. Alyssa looked straight into the camera. "My name is Alyssa Thornton," she said. A pause. A breath. "I'm not a nurse. I'm not a therapist. I'm not trained in end-of-life care. I was just a daughter." Another pause. "I gave up my job, my income, my friends, and most of my sense of self to care for my father after he became paralyzed. For 14 months, I was his legs, his hands, his voice, and in return, I was mostly invisible. Her voice didn't shake. People called me brave. Behind closed doors, they called me bitter. What no one called me was human. The host was silent, letting her speak. Alyssa leaned in. I'm not here to shame my family. I'm not here to shame the systems that let this happen. I'm here because I realized I wasn't alone. That there are thousands of people just like me drowning in silence, carrying others while no one checks if they're still breathing. She looked into the lens. And I'm not ashamed anymore. Her closing line went viral. It echoed across social media, quoted by advocacy groups and mental health pages alike. I am a survivor, and I no longer apologize for speaking. The center received over 300 inquiries the next week. Requests for affiliate programs, donations, interview requests. One senator's office emailed asking for her input on a proposed bill about caregiver compensation. Alyssa didn't feel like a politician, but she responded. She didn't ask for permission to matter. She had stopped doing that long ago. She was finally living in a world she had built. And it didn't require silence to be sacred. The day he showed up was gray, not stormy, just indecisive. The sky hung heavy with clouds that couldn't decide whether to break or hold. Alyssa was in the back room of the center helping a woman organize a stack of state medical leave forms when Janet, the front desk volunteer, knocked softly. There's someone here asking for you, she said. Says his name is Brian. Alyssa didn't move. Not at first. She knew it might happen eventually. They lived in the same state now, or close enough. And it wasn't like her name hadn't been in local papers mentioned on NPR, written in the byline of a piece on the hidden burden of family caregivers. Still, she'd imagined it differently. Maybe a phone call, maybe a letter. But not this him standing outside her center's door waiting. Tell him I'll be out in a minute, Alyssa said. She finished helping the woman, smiled, told her where to drop the forms. Then she walked out front. Brian was sitting in one of the soft chairs in the entryway, a copy of Being Mortal in his hands. He wasn't reading, just holding it. He stood when she entered. Time had changed him just enough. His beard had more gray, his hair thinner, his shoulders no longer hunched with entitlement, but with something else. Wait, reality. Hey, he said. Alyssa nodded once. He looked around the center quiet that afternoon, only 2 visitors in the side room. This place it's beautiful, he said softly. She didn't respond. He cleared his throat, searching for words. I didn't come to fight, he said, or to explain or to fix anything. A pause. I just came because I think I finally understand. Alyssa stayed still, watchful. Brian looked at the walls again, the pinned notes, the resource lists, the flyer that read, "You are not invisible here." He took a step closer. I read every post he said, even the ones that hurt. She raised her eyebrows slightly but said nothing. I kept looking for anger, accusation, but it wasn't there. What was there was weight, truth, and I realized how light I've lived, how much I asked you to carry while I measured myself in milestones and job titles. A silence stretched between them. It wasn't awkward, just full of years, of blame, of imbalance, of the things they both knew but never said out loud. I'm not here for forgiveness, Brian said. I don't think I deserve it. I just wanted to see what you built. And to tell you to your face that I see it now. Alyssa looked at him, at the man who once called her overdramatic, at the man who said Emnen yu thuong makong jukien, at the man who had defined success as the loudest voice in the room. And she saw something new, not redemption, but recognition, not healing, but a beginning of honesty. She stepped forward, held out her hand. He took it. They shook. It lasted only 2 seconds, but it said everything words couldn't. Then she let go. Brian gave a small nod, almost grateful, almost relieved. He didn't ask to come inside, didn't ask to stay. He turned toward the door, paused for one last glance, and left. The bell chimed behind him. Alyssa stood for a moment, then walked back into the center. She didn't tell anyone what had happened, because it wasn't a chapter to be retold. It was a punctuation mark, not a period, not a comma, but maybe, just maybe, a semicolon, an acknowledgement that something had ended. But not everything had to be broken. The office was small, but it was hers. Cream-colored walls, a window that overlooked the city from the 5th floor of a modest brick building. Not skyline glamorous, but real. You could see buses coming in and out of the depot, people on sidewalks with purpose in their steps. Somewhere below, a man was selling newspapers no one read anymore, shouting headlines into the wind. Alyssa sat at her new desk, walnut wood, with a small chip in the back right corner. She liked the imperfection of it, the way it mirrored her own edges, sharp in some places, worn smooth in others. A new chapter. No fanfare, no announcement, just a quiet resolve. She clicked into her browser, opened a tab she'd kept bookmarked for weeks, and stared at the application form one last time. Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology Fall Semester Application. Final submission. The form was mostly complete essays, uploaded references, secured transcript, ordered. Only one thing remained: the final submission. She hovered the mouse over the button, the words glowing faintly. Submit application. Alyssa didn't hesitate. She clicked. It was done. A document zipped into a server somewhere far away. a beginning launched by a fingertip. She leaned back, closed her eyes, exhaled. It wasn't about reinvention. It was about reclaiming. Because for so long her identity had been defined by what she gave to others. Her worth measured in service, in silence, in surviving what no one else even noticed was happening. Now she was building something different. Not from nothing, but from everything. A knock at her door. She turned. Mail cart. The receptionist handed her a plain white envelope. Internal mail, probably building codes or account updates. She smiled, thanked them, opened it absent-mindedly. But it wasn't logistics. It was a letter, typed short. Dear Alyssa, you don't know me. I'm 18. I found your blog last night after Googling how do I stop crying if I'm a bad caregiver. That was literally my search. My grandma has dementia. I've been taking care of her for 4 years, since I was 14. No one really talks about that part. They just say you're such a good girl or your parents must be proud. But I don't feel good or proud. I feel tired and invisible. Your story didn't make me feel better, but it made me feel seen for the first time. Thank you for saying the things no one says. Thank you for existing. Maya T. Alyssa held the letter in her hands for a long time. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached into her drawer and pulled out an old worn journal, the one where she used to log appointments, symptoms, fears, the one with the entries labeled Bang Chung 3H Sang and Im Lang Sao Mot Kon Dao. She flipped to the very last page, wrote one line in ink. I am no longer the echo, I am the voice. Then she closed it for good. She didn't need the recordings anymore. Didn't need the nightly logs or the whispered confessions into a digital void. Because now the world was listening. On her terms. With her name on it. Alyssa stood and walked to the window. Below, the city moved with its usual rhythm buses honking, someone laughing too loudly on a phone call, wind tugging at loose umbrellas. A normal day. But in that ordinary frame, she saw something extraordinary. Freedom. Not the kind sold in self-help slogans or Instagram captions, but hard-won, quiet, bruised knuckle freedom. The kind you claim without permission. The kind you walk into alone after years of waiting for someone to open the door for you. She turned back toward her desk, set the letter from Maya gently beside her laptop. And for the first time in years, there was no recording device running. No need to document the moment to protect it, to store it like ammunition. It was enough just to live it. Alyssa smiled. She opened a new document and began typing again. But this time not to survive. To build, to guide, to teach. Because her story wasn't a cautionary tale. It was a beginning.